A black boy helped a businessman with his broken car, even as everyone looked at him with suspicion. When a black SUV stopped in front of his house the next day, his sick mother started trembling. The autumn sun hung low in the sky as Marcus Johnson walked home from school, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. His sneakers scraped against the sidewalk of Maple Avenue, the affluent part of town he cut through to save 20 minutes on his walk home. The route took him past towering colonial houses and manicured lawns, a stark contrast to his own neighborhood. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, heavy with borrowed auto repair manuals from the school library, when he heard it. The distinct sound of a luxury engine sputtering, followed by a sharp mechanical whine that made him wince. After spending countless hours at his uncle's junkyard, he knew that sound meant trouble. Ahead, a silver Mercedes-Benz W123 had pulled to the curb, hazard lights blinking steadily. Steam rose from under the hood. An elderly man in an expensive navy suit stood beside the car, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand rubbing his forehead in frustration. "No, I need someone now," the man said into his phone, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "I have an important meeting in." He checked his gold watch. "Less than an hour." "What do you mean no one's available?" Marcus stopped walking. He knew that model inside and out, had helped his uncle restore 2 of them last summer. His fingers twitched with the familiar urge to pop the hood and take a look. The man ended his call with a sharp sigh. Marcus noticed how other pedestrians gave the scene a wide berth, some crossing to the other side of the street. A woman walking her dog eyed the situation suspiciously, clutching her purse tighter as she hurried past. Marcus took a deep breath and approached. "Excuse me, sir? I couldn't help but overhear. I might be able to help with your car." The man turned, surprise flickering across his face as he took in Marcus's appearance. The faded t-shirt, worn jeans, scuffed sneakers. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, and how exactly could you help?" "I work on cars with my uncle. That sounds like it could be a cooling system issue. Mind if I take a look?" The man hesitated, glancing around as if hoping a better option would materialize. Finally, he gestured toward the car. "Mr. Thompson," he said curtly. "And you are?" "Marcus Johnson, sir." He shrugged off his backpack and moved to the front of the car. "Could you pop the hood?" Mr. Thompson reached through the driver's window and pulled the release. The hood clicked open, and more steam escaped. Marcus propped it up, the metal warm under his fingers. The engine layout was exactly as he remembered from his uncle's shop. "When did it start overheating?" Marcus asked, eyes scanning the engine compartment. "About 10 minutes ago." The temperature gauge shot up suddenly. Marcus nodded, spotting the issue almost immediately. "Your cooling fan belt snapped. See here." He pointed to the frayed rubber belt hanging loosely. Mr. Thompson leaned in to look, keeping a careful distance. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes, sir. Pretty straightforward repair. I can do it right now if you have a replacement belt." "In the trunk," Mr. Thompson said, moving to open it. "My mechanic insists I keep basic spare parts." As Mr. Thompson retrieved the belt, Marcus noticed a black briefcase in the back seat through the window. Something about it caught his attention, the way it was positioned, locked with heavy clasps. He quickly refocused on the task at hand. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered across the street, watching with undisguised interest. Marcus heard fragments of their whispered conversations. "Should someone call? What's that boy doing to? Is Mr. Thompson okay?" Marcus blocked them out, focusing instead on removing the broken belt. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless similar repairs taking over. Mr. Thompson watched intently, his initial skepticism giving way to curious observation. "You seem to know what you're doing," Mr. Thompson said after a few minutes of silence. "Yes, sir. My uncle runs Johnson's Auto Salvage on the east side. I've been helping him since I was 10. Marcus threaded the new belt through the pulleys. "He taught me everything I know about cars." "Johnson's? I know the place. Bought some hard-to-find parts there for my vintage collection." Marcus smiled slightly, testing the belt's tension. "That's probably my Uncle Pete you dealt with." The repair took less than 20 minutes. Marcus closed the hood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Try starting it now, sir." Mr. Thompson slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine purred to life, running smooth and quiet. The temperature gauge remained steady. He stepped out, genuine surprise on his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Perfect timing, too. I can still make my meeting. He reached for his wallet. What do I owe you? Marcus shook his head. Nothing, sir. Happy to help. Nonsense. Mr. Thompson pulled out several crisp bills. You just saved me a major headache. Take it. Marcus hesitated, then accepted the money with a quiet, thank you. Sir. You're what? 14? 15? Sir. Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. 15 and already this skilled with cars. Interesting. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Hey, you never know when connections might come in handy. Marcus took the card, reading Thompson Luxury Automobiles, embossed in silver letters. Thank you again, Marcus, Mr. Thompson said, sliding back into his car. You've given me something to think about. As the Mercedes pulled away, Marcus pocketed both the money and the card. The small crowd across the street dispersed, a few people shaking their heads. Marcus picked up his backpack and resumed his walk home, his mind already turning to his mother and how the unexpected money could help with her prescriptions this month. The rest of his walk was quiet. The only sound his footsteps and the rustling autumn leaves overhead. But something felt different. Something had shifted, though he couldn't say exactly what. He just knew that helping Mr. Thompson had felt right, regardless of the suspicious stares and whispers. As he turned onto his own street, lined with modest homes and patched lawns, Marcus thought about the card in his pocket. He didn't know then that it would change his life, that this chance encounter on an autumn afternoon would open doors he never knew existed. For now, he just quickened his pace, knowing his mother would be home soon from her first job, probably already exhausted and needing her medication. The sun had nearly set by the time he reached his front door, casting long shadows across the cracked driveway where his latest project, a half-rebuilt motorcycle, waited for his attention. But that would have to wait. Right now, his mother needed him, and thanks to Mr. Thompson's generosity, he could finally help her in a way that mattered. Marcus pushed open the front door of the small ranch house, immediately hearing his mother's harsh coughing from the kitchen. His heart rate spiked. "Mom," he called out, dropping his backpack and rushing toward the sound. Sarah Johnson stood hunched over the sink, one hand braced against the counter, the other pressed to her chest as another coughing fit racked her body. Her nurse's scrubs hung loose on her thinning frame. "Here, sit down," Marcus said, guiding her to a kitchen chair. He grabbed her water bottle from the counter and the pill organizer from the windowsill. "Did you take your afternoon dose?" She nodded, still coughing, accepting the water with shaking hands. "Had to leave work early," she managed between breaths. "Getting worse." Marcus watched her take small sips, his hand on her back. The kitchen clock read 4:15 p.m. She should have been at the hospital for another 3 hours. Each early departure meant less money, and they were already behind on bills. When her breathing finally steadied, she looked up at him with tired eyes. "How was school?" "Fine," he said, moving to the stove where a pot of soup sat half-prepared. "I'll finish dinner. You rest." "Marcus, Mom, please. Just sit." She sighed but didn't argue, watching as he chopped the remaining vegetables. The kitchen was small but tidy, despite the peeling wallpaper and scratched linoleum floor. Family photos lined the walls. Marcus as a toddler on his father's shoulders, Sarah in her graduation gown from nursing school, Uncle Pete teaching 8-year-old Marcus how to change oil. "The hospital called," Sarah said after a while. "They want to reduce my hours again. Said I can't work the emergency department with this cough." Marcus's knife paused mid-chop. "What about the clinic position they promised?" "Filled internally." She rubbed her temples. "I'm trying to pick up extra shifts at the nursing home, but you can barely handle your current schedule," Marcus interrupted, turning to face her. He reached into his pocket, feeling the folded bills from Mr. Thompson. "Mom, I got some extra work today." "Here." He placed the money on the table. Sarah stared at it, then at him. "Marcus, where did this come from?" "I helped fix someone's car. On Maple Avenue." He returned to the vegetables, deliberately casual. "Guy's Mercedes broke down. Simple belt replacement. On Maple." Her voice sharpened with concern. "Did anyone give you trouble?" "No," he lied, not mentioning the suspicious onlookers. "The owner was grateful. Even gave me his business card." Sarah picked up the money with trembling fingers. "This is too much for a belt replacement." He insisted. Marcus dumped the vegetables into the pot. "It'll help with your prescriptions this month." Silence filled the kitchen. broken only by the gentle bubbling of soup and the persistent drip of their leaking faucet. Marcus knew that sound would drive Uncle Pete crazy. A simple washer replacement would fix it. Add it to the list, right after the refrigerator that hummed too loud and the back door that stuck in humid weather. "I remember when you were 6, Sarah said softly. "You took apart our old radio. Said you were going to fix the static." She smiled at the memory. "Your father just laughed. Said you had motor oil in your blood instead of plasma." Marcus stirred the soup, something tight forming in his throat. They rarely talked about his father. "He'd be proud, you know," she continued, "seeing how you've stepped up since." Another cough interrupted her words. Marcus grabbed her water bottle. "Hey, small sips." The refrigerator kicked on with its worrying rattle. Marcus made a mental note to check the compressor after dinner. Uncle Pete had shown him how to diagnose common issues, back when Marcus first started helping at the junkyard. "Uncle Pete called earlier," he said, changing the subject. "Work slow at the yard. He can only give me Saturday shifts for a while." Sarah's face fell. "Oh, honey, I know you were counting on that money. It's fine. I'll figure something else out." He served 2 bowls of soup, setting one in front of her. "Eat while it's hot." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that develops between people who know each other's rhythms. Through the kitchen window, Marcus watched the sky darken, street lights flickering on one by one. In the distance, a car backfired, reminding him of the Mercedes' sputtering engine. "I should check the fridge before bed," he said, collecting their empty bowls. "That noise is getting worse." "It's a school night, Marcus. You need rest." "Won't take long." Uncle Pete thinks it might be the thermistor. He ran water in the sink, pretending not to notice how his mother pressed a tissue to her mouth to stifle another cough. Later, after Sarah had taken her evening medication and gone to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his auto repair manual spread out before him. The house creaked and settled around him as he studied by the dim light of their cheap table lamp. He pulled Mr. Thompson's business card from his pocket, running his thumb over the embossed letters. Thompson Luxury Automobiles. He'd seen their dealership on the wealthy side of town, all glass and chrome. Nothing like Uncle Pete's cluttered salvage yard. His phone buzzed, a text from Uncle Pete. "Got that Camaro transmission you helped rebuild last month. Buyer paid cash. Your cut's ready when you want it." Marcus smiled. Uncle Pete always made sure he got a share of the profits from any job he helped with, teaching him the value of quality work. The transmission job would help, but with his mother's reduced hours. He looked toward her bedroom, where he could hear the faint wheeze of her breathing. The sound used to terrify him when her illness first appeared 8 months ago. Now it was just another note in their nightly symphony, along with the refrigerator's rattle and the dripping faucet. His eyes felt heavy, but he forced them back to the manual. There was a section on fuel injection systems he needed to understand before helping Uncle Pete with a Mustang restoration this weekend. Just a few more pages. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight. Outside, a dog barked at something unseen. Marcus's head drooped, then snapped up. Once more, he looked at Mr. Thompson's card before slipping it carefully into his wallet. Something about that chance encounter felt important, though he couldn't say why. Finally, he closed the manuals and stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Tomorrow would bring another day of balancing school, home repairs, and worry. But for now, he just needed sleep. As he passed his mother's room, he paused at her door. Her breathing seemed steadier tonight. Small victories, he thought, heading to his own room where a car magazine lay open on his bed, its pages illuminated by street light through the window. He hadn't told her about the suspicious stairs on Maple Avenue, or how his hands had trembled slightly despite knowing exactly what to do with the Mercedes. Some details were better left unshared. His mother carried enough worries already. Marcus fell asleep that night to the familiar symphony of house sounds, unaware that tomorrow would bring changes none of them could have predicted. The business card in his wallet was more than just a piece of paper. It was a key, though the door it would unlock remained hidden in the approaching dawn. The next morning broke with unusual activity on Cedar Street. Marcus noticed it while getting ready for school, the sound of neighbors talking outside, their voices carrying through his bedroom window. Curious, he pushed aside the worn curtain. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door stood on her porch in her bathrobe, phone pressed to her ear. Across the street, the Wilsons had paused their morning routine to stare at something beyond Marcus's view. Even old Mr. Parker, who rarely left his house before noon, stood at his mailbox, squinting down the street. Marcus! His mother's voice called from the kitchen. Something in her tone made him hurry out. Sarah Johnson stood by the sink, her morning coffee forgotten in her hand. Through the kitchen window, Marcus saw what had captured the neighborhood's attention. A black Cadillac Escalade, gleaming and imposing, crawled down their street like a panther in a chicken coop. "Do you know anything about this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. Before Marcus could answer, the SUV stopped directly in front of their house. His mother's hand began to shake, coffee sloshing over the rim of her mug. "Mom, it's okay," Marcus said, though his own heart had started racing. He recognized the hood ornament, the same one from Mr. Thompson's Mercedes. The driver's door opened first, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. He moved to the rear door and opened it with a flourish. Mr. Thompson emerged, as impeccably dressed as the day before, though today he wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than their monthly rent. Behind him, another man exited the vehicle, carrying a leather portfolio. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, "what did you do?" "I just fixed his car, Mom. That's all." He watched as the three men approached their front door. The peeling paint and crooked steps seemed suddenly glaring. The doorbell rang, a harsh buzz that needed fixing like everything else in the house. Marcus moved to answer it, but his mother grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, straightening her nurse's scrubs. "I'll get it." Sarah opened the door, trying to project confidence despite her obvious nervousness. "Can I help you, Mrs. Johnson?" Mr. Thompson's voice was warm, professional. "I'm Richard Thompson. Your son Marcus helped me with my car yesterday afternoon. May we come in? I have a proposition I'd like to discuss." Sarah glanced back at Marcus, who nodded slightly. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Please, come in. I apologize for the—" She gestured vaguely at their modest living room. "No apologies necessary," Mr. Thompson said, entering with his associates. His eyes took in the room, the worn but clean furniture, the family photos, the stack of auto repair manuals on the coffee table. "Marcus," he said, nodding in greeting. "Good to see you again." "You too, sir." Mr. Thompson gestured to his companions. "This is Mr. Chen, my head of security, and Mr. Rodriguez, my legal advisor." The man with the portfolio nodded, removing some documents. "Please, sit," Sarah offered, though she remained standing, her hands clasped tightly together. Mr. Thompson settled into their old armchair while his associates remained standing. "Mrs. Johnson, I'll be direct. Your son demonstrated exceptional skill yesterday, and not just with mechanics." Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her protective instinct visible. "What do you mean?" "I've been in business for 40 years, Mr. Thompson continued. "I've learned to read people. Yesterday, I watched your son work on an expensive vehicle while people stared and whispered. He never lost focus, never let their prejudice affect his work. That shows character." Marcus felt his face grow warm. He hadn't realized Mr. Thompson had noticed the onlookers. "More importantly," Mr. Thompson said, "when I offered payment, his first instinct was to decline. That's rare, especially in someone so young." He nodded to Mr. Rodriguez, who opened his portfolio. "I own a chain of luxury auto repair shops," Mr. Thompson explained. "We have an apprenticeship program for promising young mechanics. Full training, certification, and a path to a career. I'd like to offer Marcus a position." Sarah's grip on Marcus's shoulder tightened. "He's only 15, which is why we've structured this carefully." Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward, presenting documents. "The apprenticeship includes continued education. Marcus would attend school in the morning and train at our main facility in the afternoons. He'd earn a competitive salary, with health benefits extending to immediate family members." At the mention of health benefits, Sarah's hand trembled. Marcus steadied her, his mind racing. "Why?" Sarah asked directly. "Why my son?" Mr. Thompson stood, straightening his jacket. "Mrs. Johnson, do you know how many mechanics I employ?" "No, sir." "Over 200, across 12 locations. Yet yesterday, your 15-year-old son diagnosed and repaired my vehicle faster than many of my senior technicians could have. That's raw talent. I believe in investing in talent." He moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood. "I grew up not far from here. Different street, same circumstances. Someone took a chance on me once. Changed my life. He turned back to them. I'd like to do the same for Marcus. Sarah sank into the couch, overwhelmed. The health benefits, they cover pre-existing conditions. Full coverage, Mr. Rodriguez confirmed. Our premium plan. Marcus watched his mother's face, saw the calculations happening behind her eyes. No more choosing between medication and groceries. No more exhausting double shifts. There is one condition, Mr. Thompson said. All eyes turned to him. Marcus needs to understand. This isn't charity. It's an investment. I expect dedication, hard work, and professionalism. Some of my senior staff may not welcome you. Prove them wrong through your work, not your words. Can you do that? Marcus straightened his shoulders. Yes, sir. Good. Mr. Thompson nodded to Mr. Rodriguez, who laid out the documents on their coffee table. Everything's detailed here. Take time to review it. My card has my direct number. Call with any questions. Sarah stared at the papers, her nursing training kicking in. How soon? When would this start? Next Monday, if the paperwork is signed by Friday. Mr. Thompson checked his watch. I have meetings to attend, but Mr. Rodriguez can stay to answer any questions. As Mr. Thompson moved toward the door, he paused by Marcus. Yesterday, you saw a problem and stepped up to fix it, despite what others might think. Keep that attitude. He extended his hand. Welcome to Thompson Luxury Automobiles, Mr. Johnson. Marcus shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. After Mr. Thompson and Mr. Chen departed, the sound of the Escalade starting seemed to break a spell. The neighbors were still watching, their curiosity now mixed with amazement. Mr. Rodriguez spent the next hour explaining the contract details while Sarah asked careful questions about insurance coverage and work hours. Marcus sat quietly, watching his mother's tension slowly ease as each answer addressed her concerns. By the time Mr. Rodriguez left, the morning sun had fully risen, casting long shadows through their windows. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, reading through the papers again, her coffee long cold. Mom! Marcus ventured. What do you think? She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I think. She took a deep breath. I think your father would be so proud right now. Marcus swallowed hard. Is that a yes? Sarah stood and pulled him into a tight hug. That's a yes, baby. That's absolutely a yes. Outside, the neighbors still gossiped, their speculation running wild about the mysterious black SUV and its well-dressed occupants. But inside the small house on Cedar Street, mother and son held each other, feeling for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Monday morning arrived with a mix of drizzle and nervous energy. Marcus stood outside Thompson Luxury Automobiles an hour before his scheduled start time, staring up at the gleaming glass and steel building. The main service center stretched behind it like a cathedral of automotive engineering, its 12-bay doors still closed for the morning. He adjusted his new work shirt, crisp blue with the company logo embroidered on the chest, and checked his watch again. 6:55 a.m. His official start time wasn't until 8 o'clock, but Uncle Pete had always said, early is on time is late. A few employees had already arrived, their expressions curious as they passed him on their way inside. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed through the service entrance door. The main shop floor stretched out before him, spotless and organized in a way Uncle Pete's yard could never be. Tool chests worth more than his mother's car lined the walls. In the center bay, a red Ferrari sat suspended on a lift, its underbody gleaming under the fluorescent lights. You lost, kid. Marcus turned to find a tall man in his 50s watching him, arms crossed over his chest. The name Frank was stitched on his work shirt, along with patches indicating master certification status. No, sir. I'm Marcus Johnson, the new apprentice. Frank's expression hardened slightly. Right. Thompson's project. He jerked his thumb toward a door marked staff room. Wait in there. Mike'll get you started when he arrives. Marcus headed to the staff room, feeling Frank's eyes on his back. The room was empty except for a younger mechanic pouring coffee, who barely glanced up as Marcus entered. He chose a chair in the corner and pulled out one of his manuals, determined to use the time productively. The pages fell open to a familiar diagram, the same Mercedes model he'd fixed for Mr. Thompson. More mechanics filtered in over the next hour, each one noticing him, then deliberately looking away. Their whispered conversations weren't quite quiet enough. Thompson's charity case. Probably can't tell a wrench from a screwdriver. Won't last a week. At exactly 8 a.m., a stocky man with graying hair entered. Marcus Johnson. Marcus stood quickly. Yes, sir. Mike Sullivan, shop foreman. Come with me. Mike led him through the facility, pointing out different areas: parts department, specialized tool storage, computer diagnostic stations. They stopped at an empty bay near the end. This is your station, Mike said. Keep it clean, keep it organized. Tools go back exactly where you found them. Understand? Yes, sir. Mike handed him a tablet. Digital service manuals, work orders, and diagnostic software. Frank will oversee your training. He paused. Look, kid, Mr. Thompson sees something in you. But this isn't your uncle's junkyard. These cars cost more than most houses. One mistake. I understand, sir. We'll see. Mike checked his clipboard. First job's an oil change on a new S-Class. Should be simple enough. Simple turned complicated the moment Frank appeared with the work order. The car rolled in, a 2024 Mercedes-Benz S580. Its black paint reflecting the overhead lights like liquid glass. Owner wants full synthetic OEM filter, Frank said, his tone suggesting he expected Marcus to fail. Don't scratch anything. Marcus nodded, already reviewing the procedure in his mind. He'd done countless oil changes at Uncle Pete's, but never on something this expensive. He pulled up the service manual on his tablet, double-checking the specifications. The work proceeded smoothly at first. Marcus located the drain plug, positioned the oil pan, and began the drain process. He was just starting to relax when he heard a sharp intake of breath behind him. Stop! Frank's voice boomed across the shop. What filter are you using? Marcus showed him the part. OEM Mercedes-Benz, specifically for the S580. Look closer. Marcus examined the filter again, his stomach dropping. The part number was off by one digit, similar, but not exact. If he'd installed it, that could have caused a six-figure engine failure, Frank said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This isn't some junkie you can patch together with duct tape and prayers. Heat crept up Marcus's neck as other mechanics paused their work to watch. He'd made exactly the kind of mistake Mike had warned him about. I'll get the correct filter, Marcus said quietly. No. Frank grabbed the work order. You're done here. I'll finish it. Marcus stood there, humiliation burning in his chest, as Frank took over the job. The whispers around the shop grew louder, more pointed. Told you. Doesn't belong here. Matter of time. The morning dragged on. Marcus was relegated to cleaning tools and organizing parts, basic tasks usually given to lot attendants. He worked silently, methodically, trying to ignore the sidelong glances and whispered comments. During lunch break, he sat alone in the staff room, not touching his sandwich. He pulled out his phone, tempted to call his mother, but stopped. She'd already taken her medication money out of the emergency fund to buy his new work clothes. He couldn't let her down. Rough morning. Marcus looked up to find Mr. Thompson standing in the doorway. Sir, Marcus struggled to find words. I almost used the wrong filter. I should have triple-checked. Yes, you should have, Mr. Thompson agreed, sitting across from him. That's why we have senior mechanics supervising. To catch mistakes before they become disasters. He studied Marcus for a moment. Do you know why I started as a mechanic before building this company? No, sir. Because I wanted to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up. Every successful person I know has failed at some point. The question is, what did they learn from it? Marcus straightened slightly. I won't make that mistake again. Good. Mr. Thompson stood. There's a new Audi RS7 coming in this afternoon. Needs a full diagnostic workup. I want you to assist Mike with it. Sir, after this morning, the morning is over. Focus on what's next. Mr. Thompson headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Marcus, I noticed you were here at 7 a.m. Good. Keep that up. The afternoon brought a fresh start with the Audi. Marcus worked carefully, double and triple checking everything before proceeding. Mike watched closely but offered occasional words of approval when Marcus showed particular attention to detail. By closing time, Marcus's shoulders ached from tension, but he completed the diagnostic work without any more mistakes. As other mechanics left for the day, he stayed behind, meticulously cleaning his work area and reviewing the service manual sections for tomorrow's scheduled jobs. The shop was almost empty when Frank approached his station. Lock up when you're done, he said gruffly, tossing Marcus a key. Don't make me regret it. Marcus caught the key, understanding the small gesture of trust it represented. Yes, sir. Thank you. After everyone left, Marcus sat at his workbench, making detailed notes about the day's lessons. The wrong filter sat on his desk, a reminder of how costly one small oversight could be. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. How was your first day? Marcus stared at the message, thinking carefully before responding, learning a lot. See you soon. He gathered his things, taking one last look at his station. Tomorrow would be better. It had to be. He'd prove himself through his work, just like Mr. Thompson said. As he locked the service entrance, Marcus saw his reflection in the glass door, the Thompson Luxury Automobiles logo on his shirt, a reminder of the opportunity he couldn't waste. The morning's failure had shaken him, but hadn't broken him. Tomorrow was another chance to get it right. The next 2 weeks settled into a rhythm of early mornings and late evenings at the shop. Marcus arrived before sunrise each day, organizing his tools and reviewing manuals before his shift started. But on this particular morning, something was wrong. His toolbox looked different. Not obviously, someone had been careful about that. But Marcus knew his organization system. The 10mm socket was in the wrong slot. The torque wrench had been moved. His precision screwdriver set was completely missing. Looking for something, Marcus turned to find Dave, one of the senior mechanics, watching him with barely concealed amusement. 2 other technicians stood nearby, pretending to work while obviously listening. My screwdriver set, Marcus said evenly. Have you seen it? Dave shrugged. Tools grow legs around here sometimes. Maybe you left it at your uncle's junkyard. Marcus bit back a response, remembering Mr. Thompson's words about proving himself through work, not words. He'd brought his own basic tools from home, but the specialized sets belonged to the shop. The morning's first job was a brake service on a Porsche 911. Marcus borrowed a screwdriver set from the community toolbox, aware of the time he was losing, aware of the eyes watching him scramble. He was halfway through the brake job when he noticed something else wrong. The brake pads he'd selected from the parts room weren't sitting quite right. Looking closer, he realized why. They were the wrong specification, despite being in the correct box. Everything okay there, kid? Dave called out, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what Marcus had found. Marcus took a slow breath. Parts were mislabeled, he said neutrally. I'll get the correct ones. This time he checked each pad individually before starting the installation. The job took longer than it should have, but he refused to rush. One mistake like the oil filter incident was enough. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from his mother. Doctor says new medication is helping. Thank you for the insurance. Love you. The message steadied him. This wasn't just about him anymore. The morning dragged on. More tools disappeared. Parts were mysteriously swapped. Job assignments changed without notice. Marcus adapted, double-checking everything, borrowing tools when needed, staying focused despite the growing frustration. During lunch break, he sat alone as usual, making notes in his manual. The staff room door opened and Mike, the shop foreman, entered. Johnson, Mike said, your mother called. Something about needed to reach you. Marcus's heart jumped. He pulled out his phone, 3 missed calls. He stepped outside to return them. Marcus. His mother's voice was strained. I'm at the hospital. What happened? Bad reaction to the new medication. Doctor wants to keep me overnight for observation. She coughed. I'm okay. Just, could you bring my overnight bag? The blue one under my bed. I'll leave right now. No, she said firmly. After your shift. I'm stable, just tired. Don't risk your job. Marcus argued, but she insisted. When he returned to the shop floor, he found his current job, a routine transmission service, had been reassigned to another mechanic. Too slow, Dave explained with a smirk. Customer was waiting. Marcus clenched his fists, then deliberately relaxed them. He still had 4 hours left in his shift. 4 hours to prove he belonged here. The afternoon brought a complex diagnostic job on a Bentley Continental. Marcus threw himself into the work, grateful for the distraction from worrying about his mother. He was deep in the engine compartment when he heard a clatter. Tools scattered across the floor, his borrowed metric wrench set, not from the workbench. No one was standing close enough to have accidentally hit it. As Marcus gathered the tools, he noticed something else. The torque settings on his digital wrench had been changed. If he hadn't caught it, problem. Frank appeared beside him. Someone's been adjusting my tools, Marcus said quietly. And parts are being switched. Frank's expression hardened. Serious accusation. Got proof? No, sir. Then I suggest you focus on your work instead of making excuses. Marcus watched Frank walk away, understanding the message. He was on his own. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. Marcus triple-checked every tool, every part, every specification. His progress was slow but meticulous. He couldn't afford another mistake, sabotage or not. At closing time, he discovered his locker had been jammed shut. 10 minutes of careful work with a screwdriver finally got it open. Inside, he found his missing tool set, along with a note. Take the hint. Marcus crumpled the note, his hand shaking slightly. The urge to quit was strong. Uncle Pete would take him back at the salvage yard in a heartbeat. But then he thought of his mother in the hospital, finally getting the care she needed because of this job's insurance. He was gathering his things when Mr. Thompson's voice came from behind him. Still here? Marcus straightened. Yes, sir. Just finishing up. Mr. Thompson studied him for a moment. I hear there have been some equipment issues. Nothing I can't handle, sir. Mr. Thompson walked to Marcus's workbench, examining the organized tools. You know, when I first started, I worked for a shop that didn't want me there either. Old guard, set in their ways. He picked up a wrench, tested its weight. One day, I caught someone tampering with my tools. Want to know what I did? What, sir? Installed a small camera. Never said a word about it. Just kept working, kept improving. Let the footage speak for itself when the time was right. He set the wrench down carefully. Just a story from the old days. Not advice, of course. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding. Get to the hospital, Mr. Thompson said. Your mother needs you. And Marcus? Tomorrow's another day. After Mr. Thompson left, Marcus sat in his car for a long moment, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and ordered a tiny wireless camera from a local electronics store. He could pick it up on his way to the hospital. The hospital corridors were quiet when he arrived, visiting hours almost over. He found his mother asleep in her room, and Ford dripping steadily. The sight of her, pale but peaceful, strengthened his resolve. He placed her overnight bag on the bedside chair and kissed her forehead softly. On his way out, he passed the nurse's station where she used to work. Several nurses waved, asked about her condition. Their genuine concern reminded him why this job mattered. It wasn't just about cars anymore. That night, Marcus stayed up late, studying the service manual for tomorrow's scheduled jobs. The camera sat on his desk, ready to be installed. He wouldn't confront anyone, wouldn't accuse. He'd just work, learn, improve. Let the truth reveal itself. His phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Pete. Heard about your mom. Need anything? Marcus replied, no thanks. Got it covered. And he did. For the first time since starting at Thompson's, he felt truly certain about his path forward. The saboteurs thought they were breaking him, but each challenge just made him more determined. Tomorrow would bring more missing tools, more switched parts, more suspicious accidents. But tomorrow would also bring proof. Marcus smiled slightly, thinking of Mr. Thompson's story. The old man was cleverer than anyone realized. He set his alarm for an hour earlier than usual. He'd need time to install the camera before anyone else arrived. Let them play their games. He'd win through patience and persistence, just like always. His mother's words from dinner a few nights ago came back to him. You're so much like your father. He never let anyone push him around either. He just worked harder, proved them wrong. Marcus looked at his reflection in the bedroom window. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he'd start fighting back, quietly, carefully, but effectively. The camera sat ready. The truth would come out. All he had to do was keep working, keep learning, keep proving himself. The rest would take care of itself. The vintage Aston Martin DB5 rolled into Marcus's bay early Friday morning, its silver paint glowing under the shop lights. Even Dave and his crew stopped their usual harassment to admire it. $500,000 of British engineering, Mike announced, handing Marcus the work order. Full restoration of the fuel injection system. Mr. Thompson specifically requested you for this one. Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the shop on him. This wasn't just a job, it was a test. After 3 weeks of sabotage and harassment, Mr. Thompson was giving him a chance to prove himself. His hidden camera had captured plenty, Tools disappearing, parts being switched, calibrations altered. But he hadn't shown the footage to anyone yet. This job mattered more. Timeline? Marcus asked, already scanning the service manual on his tablet. Take all day if you need it, Mike said. Owner's in no rush. Just do it right. Marcus nodded, doing his pre-job tool check. He'd started locking his tools in his car during breaks after too many mysterious accidents. Today, everything needed to be perfect. He was 2 hours into the diagnostic phase when his phone buzzed. The hospital's number. His chest tightened as he answered. Mr. Johnson. A nurse's voice, tense. Your mother's had another episode. The new medication isn't working as expected. Doctor wants to discuss options. Marcus looked at the Aston Martin, then at Mike watching from his office. How serious? She's stable, but you should come when you can. The world seemed to tilt slightly. He thought the new medication was working. The insurance was supposed to fix this. I'll be there soon, he promised, ending the call. Mike emerged from his office. Everything okay? My mother. Marcus started. Take lunch early, Mike said, understanding. But that car needs to be done today. Marcus drove to the hospital in a daze, his mind split between fuel injection specifications and his mother's worsening condition. The hospital corridor seemed longer than usual. He found Sarah sitting up in bed, looking exhausted but alert. Dr. Chen stood nearby, reviewing charts. The new medication is causing complications, Dr. Chen explained. We need to switch to a different treatment protocol. More aggressive, but also more expensive. How much more? Marcus asked. The number Dr. Chen quoted made his stomach drop. Even with the insurance, the copay would be substantial. I won't do it, Sarah said firmly. We can't afford Dash. We can, Marcus interrupted. I'll figure it out. Back at the shop, Marcus found a small crowd gathered around the Aston Martin. Dave stood by the open hood, holding something. Look what I found, Dave announced, holding up a fuel injector. Wrong specification. Could have damaged the entire system. Guess some people never learn. Marcus froze. He'd personally verified those parts that morning. I checked those myself, he said, keeping his voice steady. They were correct. Well, they're not now, Dave smirked. Mike's gonna love this. That's when Marcus saw it. A glimpse of his missing precision screwdriver set in Dave's toolbox. The same set that had disappeared 3 weeks ago. The final piece clicked into place. Something snapped inside him. Check the security footage, Marcus said loudly, drawing attention from across the shop. Dave's smirk faltered. What? The camera I installed 3 weeks ago. Check it. Right now. The shop went silent. Dave's face darkened. You little Dash. Is there a problem here? Mr. Thompson stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. Sir, Marcus said, I can prove someone's been sabotaging my work. He pulled out his phone, pulled up the video files. I have footage of tools being stolen, parts being switched, calibrations being changed, including what just happened with the Aston Martin. Dave took a step forward, but Mr. Thompson's raised hand stopped him. My office, Mr. Thompson said. Both of you. Now. The walk to the executive offices was silent. Dave's face had gone from angry to worried. They found Mike already waiting inside. Play the footage, Mr. Thompson ordered, settling behind his desk. Marcus connected his phone to the office TV. The videos were clear, Dave and 2 other mechanics systematically sabotaging his work, switching parts, stealing tools. The final clip showed Dave switching the fuel injectors on the Aston Martin just minutes earlier. When it ended, Mr. Thompson's voice was cold. Dave, go wait in HR. Mike, escort him. After they left, Mr. Thompson studied Marcus for a long moment. Why didn't you show these videos sooner? I wanted to prove myself through my work, sir. Like you said. And your mother? How is she? Marcus blinked at the sudden change of topic. Not good, sir. The new medication isn't working. Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. You know, I could have fired Dave weeks ago. I knew something was happening. But I wanted to see how you'd handle it. Sir, this business isn't just about fixing cars, Marcus. It's about integrity, patience, strategy. You showed all 3. He leaned forward. Dave's finished here. So are his accomplices. But more importantly, I'm promoting you to full apprentice status. Comes with a pay raise and enhanced family medical benefits. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Sir, your mother will get the care she needs, Mr. Thompson said firmly. You focus on learning, on growing. That Aston Martin still needs fixing. Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned this. Mr. Thompson stood. Now, get back to work. Show them what you can do when no one's sabotaging you. The shop floor was tense when Marcus returned. Word of Dave's firing had spread quickly. The remaining mechanics gave him a wide berth as he approached the Aston Martin. Marcus pulled out his phone, called the hospital. Mom? Good news. We can afford the new treatment. He smiled, feeling truly confident for the first time in weeks. Everything's going to be okay. He spent the rest of the day on the Aston Martin, working with a focus and freedom he hadn't felt since starting. No one bothered him. No tools disappeared. No parts were switched. By closing time, the DB5's engine purred like new. Mike tested it personally, nodding in approval. Clean work, he said simply. Marcus stayed late, as usual, cleaning his tools and preparing for Monday. But tonight felt different. The shop felt different. He'd faced their worst and survived. More than survived, he'd won. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. Doctor says we can start new treatment tomorrow. Proud of you, baby. Marcus smiled, looking around his workspace. The missing tools had mysteriously reappeared. His precision screwdriver set sat in its proper place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But that's all they'd be, challenges to overcome, not obstacles to break him. He was exactly where he belonged. The Aston Martin stood gleaming under the shop lights, a testament to what he could do when given a fair chance. Mr. Thompson had been right. Proving himself through his work was the best revenge. Marcus gathered his things, ready to head home. But first, he had one stop to make. His mother was waiting, and for the first time in months, he had only good news to share. Monday morning arrived with a different energy in the shop. Where silence and sideways glances had once greeted Marcus, now there were cautious nods. Dave's empty base served as a quiet reminder of Friday's events. Marcus arrived at his usual early hour, but today he wasn't alone. Frank stood at the parts counter, coffee in hand. Johnson, Frank called out. Got something to show you. Marcus followed Frank to the special tools room. Inside, a new red toolbox stood apart from the others, still wrapped in plastic. Shop policy, Frank explained. Full apprentices get their own professional set. He handed Marcus a key. Don't make me regret supporting your promotion. Marcus unwrapped the toolbox slowly, revealing pristine drawers of precision tools, everything he'd been borrowing or bringing from home, now professionally organized and calibrated. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Frank's voice was gruff but not unkind. Just keep working like you did on that Aston. Speaking of which, owner was impressed. Requested you specifically for future services. The morning's first job was a complex transmission rebuild on a Porsche Cayenne. Marcus set up his new tools methodically, following the organization system he'd developed over the past weeks. Mind if I observe? Marcus turned to find Tony, one of the senior mechanics who'd always kept his distance, standing nearby. Of course not, sir. Drop the sir, kid. You earned your spot. Tony pulled up a shop stool. That tracking system you use for torque sequences. Never seen anything like it. Marcus demonstrated his method as he worked, explaining the color-coding system he'd developed at Uncle Pete's yard. Tony listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions. By lunch, 3 other mechanics had stopped by to watch. The transmission rebuild, which would have taken all day 3 weeks ago, was nearly complete. Marcus's phone buzzed, his mother's daily update. New treatment going well. Doctor says inflammation markers are down. Love you. He smiled, typing back a quick response before returning to work. The afternoon brought a steady stream of jobs. Diagnostic work on a Ferrari, brake service on a Bentley, electrical troubleshooting on a Maserati. Each task flowed smoothly without sabotage or interference. Hey, Johnson. Mike called out around 3. Got a special request. Customer wants full maintenance inspection on a classic Jaguar E-Type. Usually give these to Frank, but he suggested you. Frank, passing by with an armload of parts, nodded. Kid's got good hands for the classics. Gentle touch. The Jaguar rolled in, a 1964 Series 1, its dark green paint deep enough to swim in. Marcus approached it with reverence, remembering Uncle Pete's lessons about handling vintage machines. Beautiful, isn't she? Marcus turned to find Mr. Thompson standing behind him. Yes, sir. Series 1 3.8 liter, if I'm not mistaken. Good eye. Mr. Thompson smiled. She's mine, actually. Been in the family 30 years. He ran a hand along the car's curved hood. Think you can handle her? Yes, sir. Good. Take your time. Do it right. Mr. Thompson headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Marcus, your mother's new treatment. Doctors say it's showing promising results. Marcus looked up sharply. You've been checking. I take care of my investments. Mr. Thompson smiled again. Carry on. The inspection took the rest of the afternoon. Marcus worked methodically, documenting everything in detail. Other mechanics stopped by periodically, offering tips about the E-Type's quirks and characteristics. Watch that fuel line, Tony advised. They're notorious for hidden wear spots. Check the synchros in second gear, Frank added. Common issue with these. Each suggestion was offered respectfully, professionally, mechanic to mechanic, not superior to novice. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. As closing time approached, Marcus was deep in the engine bay when he heard wheels squeaking across the shop floor. He emerged to find his Uncle Pete, pushing a familiar tool cart. Brought the rest of your tools from the yard, Pete said, grinning. Figured you could use them here. Marcus wiped his hands, embracing his uncle. Thanks, but I got a new set now. Keep them both. Pete examined the E-Type appreciatively. Never thought I'd see you working on machines like this. Your dad would have loved it. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Thompson appeared, extending his hand to Pete. Thank you for teaching Marcus the fundamentals. You built a solid foundation. Just showed him the basics, Pete said modestly. He did the real work himself. They talked shop for a while, Pete sharing stories about Marcus's early days learning at the salvage yard. Other mechanics joined the conversation, adding their own observations about his progress. After Pete left, Marcus stayed late as usual, detailing his inspection findings on the E-Type. The shop felt different now, not just peaceful, but welcoming. The tools in his new box gleamed under the lights, each one precisely placed. His phone buzzed again, a photo from his mother. She was sitting up in her hospital chair, smiling, some color returned to her cheeks. The text read, "Doctors say I can come home next week." You did it, baby? Marcus sat back, emotion tightening his throat. 3 weeks ago, he'd been fighting just to keep his tools from disappearing. Now, Johnson. Frank's voice came from behind him. Need your help with something tomorrow. Got a McLaren coming in, tricky electrical issue. Thought you might have some ideas. Yes, Marcus caught himself. Thanks, Frank. I'd like that. After Frank left, Marcus finished his paperwork, cleaned his station, and took one last look at the E-Type. His reflection in its polished surface showed someone different from the nervous 15-year-old who'd first walked through these doors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The McLaren with Frank, more classic cars, increasingly complex repairs. But now they were opportunities, not threats. He'd earned his place, not just through skill, but through character. The shop lights dimmed automatically as he gathered his things. In the parking lot, his uncle's old tools sat ready to be organized alongside his new ones. The perfect blend of where he'd come from and where he was going. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, his mind already working on the McLaren's electrical system. For the first time since starting at Thompson's, he felt truly, completely at peace. He belonged here, not because Mr. Thompson had given him a chance, but because he'd proved he deserved it. His mother was getting better. His future was secure. And tomorrow he'd help Frank with that McLaren, learning and growing, adding another piece to the foundation he was building. The night was full of possibility, and Marcus Johnson was ready for whatever came next. The McLaren's electrical issue turned out to be more challenging than expected, taking Marcus and Frank 3 days to fully resolve. But on Thursday morning, something even more interesting rolled into the shop. A 1961 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster, its silver paint dulled with age, its engine silent. Complete restoration, Mike announced, gathering the team. Owner wants it competition-ready for the Pebble Beach Conkers next year. Mr. Thompson's assigned Marcus as lead mechanic on this one. The shop went quiet. Lead mechanic on a multi-million-dollar restoration. Even Frank looked surprised. Sir, Marcus started, I've never led a full restoration. You've got support, Mike assured him. Frank and Tony will consult. But Mr. Thompson insisted, said something about coming full circle. Marcus understood immediately. This was the same model he'd helped restore pieces of at Uncle Pete's, learning on salvage parts. Now he was facing the real thing. Timeline? He asked. 6 weeks for the initial phase. Engine rebuild, transmission overhaul, full electrical renovation. Mike handed him a thick folder. Here's the original documentation and restoration specs. Owner wants everything period correct. Marcus spent the morning studying the car and documents, making detailed notes. Other mechanics stopped by periodically, offering insights about the 300 SL's notorious quirks. Fuel injection system's tricky, Tony warned. They didn't get it quite right back then. Watch the swing axle setup, Frank added. Dangerous if not properly calibrated. Around noon, Mr. Thompson appeared with an elderly gentleman in an expensive suit. Marcus, Mr. Thompson called. Meet Mr. Harrison, the owner. He'd like to discuss your restoration plan. Marcus wiped his hands carefully before shaking Mr. Harrison's hand. The older man studied him intently. Rather young for such a complex project, Mr. Harrison observed. Yes, sir, but I've worked on this model before, at my uncle's yard. We restored several key components. The salvage yard. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows rose. You learned Mercedes restoration at a junkyard. Some of the best training there is, Mr. Thompson interjected smoothly. Learning to problem solve with limited resources. Marcus can show you his preliminary assessment. Marcus pulled out his notes, explaining his findings and proposed approach. Mr. Harrison listened with growing interest as Marcus detailed the engine's condition, the electrical challenges, and his plans for maintaining period authenticity. You've done your homework, Mr. Harrison admitted finally. But this car, it's been in my family since new. My father bought it directly from Mercedes-Benz. It must be perfect. I understand, sir. Marcus gestured to the engine bay. Look at these serial numbers. Everything matches the original documentation. Even the wiring harness routing is factory correct. This isn't just a car, it's history. It deserves to be restored right. Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. Richard, he said to Mr. Thompson, you might be right about this young man. He turned back to Marcus. Carry on. I'll check progress weekly. After they left, Marcus dove into the work. The first challenge was documenting everything before disassembly. Each part had to be photographed, labeled, and stored properly. He created a detailed database on his tablet, tracking every component. Frank appeared with a coffee. Smart system, he observed, watching Marcus work. Mind if I borrow that format for the Aston restoration? Of course not. Marcus showed him the template he created. I learned this from my uncle. He always said organization saves more time than speed. The morning passed quickly. Marcus had just started the careful process of engine removal when his phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Doctor says I can start work again next month. Part-time at first. You don't have to carry everything anymore, baby. He smiled, typing back. Focus on getting better. I got this. The engine extraction was delicate work. Marcus triple-checked every connection before making any cuts or removals. By late afternoon, they were ready for the lift. Hold up, Tony called out. Something's not right. Marcus stopped immediately. Tony pointed to a fuel line they'd almost missed, hidden behind the main harness. One wrong move would have damaged it. Good catch, Marcus acknowledged. Let's document this variation. Might be important for authenticity. Word spread through the shop about Marcus's methodical approach to the restoration. Other mechanics began stopping by regularly, some offering help, others just watching and learning. Never seen someone your age with such patience, one older mechanic commented. Most kids want to rush in, show off. Can't rush history, Marcus replied, carefully bagging and labeling another component. The real challenge came when they finally got the engine on the stand. Years of use had taken their toll, and some of the damage wasn't visible until they started disassembly. This could be trouble, Frank said, examining the head gasket. Finding an original replacement. I might know someone, Marcus said slowly. Uncle Pete has connections in the vintage Mercedes community. Let me make some calls. During his lunch break, Marcus reached out to Pete, who reached out to his contacts. By end of day, they had a lead on a period-correct gasket still in its original Mercedes packaging. Mr. Harrison arrived for his first progress check just as they were finishing the engine disassembly. Marcus walked him through everything, showing his documentation system and explaining each step of the process. Most shops would have rushed this part, Mr. Harrison noted. Just get to the repairs. Worry about documentation later. Documentation is part of the repair, sir, Marcus replied. Every car tells a story. We're just making sure your car's story is preserved accurately. Mr. Harrison nodded approvingly. You understand. This car, it's the last thing my father and I restored together before he passed. Every mark, every repair, every quirk has meaning. We'll preserve as much originality as possible, Marcus promised. Only replacing what absolutely needs to be replaced. After Mr. Harrison left, Mr. Thompson pulled Marcus aside. You've impressed him, he said. Not an easy thing to do. He's rejected work from some of the most prestigious shops in the country. I just treated his car the way I'd want someone to treat my father's car, Marcus replied quietly. Mr. Thompson smiled. Exactly. That's exactly why I chose you for this project. He looked at the partially disassembled 300 SL. This isn't just a test of your mechanical skills, Marcus. It's about understanding what these cars mean to their owners. The stories they carry. The day ended with Marcus carefully covering the car and securing all the labeled components. His documentation folder was thick with notes and photos, each detail meticulously recorded. His phone buzzed one last time, another text from his mother. So Mr. Thompson at the hospital today. He stopped by to check on me. Said you're leading a major project. Marcus smiled, typing back. Tell you all about it when I get home. Love you. As he gathered his tools, Frank appeared again. Good first day, he said gruffly. But tomorrow's the real test. We start the serious disassembly. You ready? Marcus looked at the covered car, thinking of Mr. Harrison and his father, of all the stories this machine carried. Yes, he said confidently. I'm ready. He left the shop that night feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of opportunity. This project was more than a test. It was a chance to prove that his approach to cars, learned in a humble salvage yard, could stand alongside the best in the business. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Marcus was prepared. He had the skills, the support, and most importantly, the understanding of what this car meant to its owner. That understanding would guide every decision, every repair, every restoration choice. The 300 SL waited under its cover, its story paused but not ended. Marcus would make sure its next chapter was worthy of its history. 6 weeks later, the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL sat in the center of Thompson Luxury Automobiles' main showroom, its silver paint gleaming under spotlights. The restoration team gathered around it, Marcus at the front, for the official unveiling to Mr. Harrison. The last month and a half had been intense. Every component restored, every detail scrutinized, every decision carefully documented. Marcus had practically lived in the shop, often staying past midnight to ensure everything was perfect. Moment of truth, Frank muttered beside him. Marcus adjusted his tie. Mr. Thompson had insisted everyone dress formally for the occasion. His mother sat in the front row of chairs set up for the presentation, looking healthier than she had in months, wearing the new dress she'd bought for the occasion. Mr. Thompson entered with Mr. Harrison and several other distinguished-looking individuals. Gentlemen, Mr. Thompson announced, welcome to a very special unveiling. Marcus, would you do the honors? Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the group. Mr. Harrison, when you entrusted us with your father's 300 SL, you asked for more than just a restoration. You asked us to preserve a family legacy. He gestured to the covered car. Every step of this process was guided by that responsibility. We sourced only period-correct parts. Any components that needed fabrication were created using original Mercedes-Benz specifications. The documentation package includes photographs and notes on every repair, every decision, and every original mark we preserved. Marcus reached for the cover. Sir, I present your father's Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, restored to its original glory. He pulled the cover away smoothly. Gasps filled the showroom. The 300 SL gleamed like it had just rolled off the 1961 production line, every curve and detail perfect. Mr. Harrison approached slowly, running his hand along the fender. The paint, it's exactly the same shade. We found the original paint code in the documentation, Marcus explained. Had it custom-matched by the same company that supplied Mercedes-Benz in 1961. The interior, original leather restored where possible, New sections match perfectly to existing patterns. Even the stitching follows the factory spacing. Mr. Harrison opened the driver's door, sat behind the wheel. His hands gripped it tightly as memories seemed to wash over him. "The scratch," he said suddenly. "Under the dash. My father's ring caught it during our last drive together." "Is it?" Marcus smiled. "Look down to your right, sir." Mr. Harrison bent to look. There it was, a small scratch, carefully preserved while everything around it had been restored. Tears welled in his eyes. "You understood," he said quietly. "You actually understood." Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "Start her up, Charles. Hear what your father's car sounds like again." The engine caught immediately, settling into the distinctive purr of a perfectly tuned 300 SL. Mr. Harrison sat listening, his eyes closed. "My father would have loved this," he said finally. "Young man, you've done more than restore a car. You've brought back a piece of my history." The presentation continued with Marcus walking through the technical details of the restoration. Other shop employees added their parts of the story, but everyone deferred to Marcus's lead. "The attention to detail is remarkable," one of Mr. Harrison's guests commented. Turned out he was a judge from Pebble Beach. "This car will do very well at the Conkers." After the formal presentation, as people mingled and examined the car, Mr. Thompson called for attention once more. "Today marks more than just the completion of a remarkable restoration," he announced. "It also marks a milestone for Thompson Luxury Automobiles." Marcus Johnson joined us just a few months ago as an apprentice. Today, I'm proud to announce his promotion to full restoration specialist, the youngest in our company's history. Applause filled the showroom. Marcus felt his mother's hand slip into his, squeezing tight. "Furthermore," Mr. Thompson continued, "we're establishing a new youth apprenticeship program, inspired by Marcus's success. Because talent can come from anywhere, if given the opportunity to grow." More applause. Marcus saw tears in his mother's eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. The formal event gradually wound down. Mr. Harrison spent a long time talking with Marcus about the car's details, finally pressing something into his hand, a vintage Mercedes-Benz technician's pin. "My father's," he explained. "He'd want you to have it." As the crowd thinned, Frank approached with several other mechanics. "Not bad, kid," he said gruffly. "Not bad at all. Got another restoration coming in next week. Interested?" "Definitely," Marcus grinned. Finally, only Marcus, his mother, and Mr. Thompson remained in the showroom. The 300 SL sat gleaming under the lights, a testament to what was possible with skill, patience, and opportunity. "Hard to believe it's been only 4 months," Mr. Thompson said, studying the car. "From fixing my Mercedes on Maple Avenue to this." "Thank you, sir," Marcus said, "for taking a chance on me." "No, Marcus. Thank you for proving me right." Mr. Thompson smiled. "Now, take your mother to dinner. Celebrate. Monday brings new challenges." Later that evening, Marcus and his mother sat at a nice restaurant, the kind they'd never been able to afford before. She looked so much better, the new treatment having worked wonders. "I'm back at the hospital next week," she said. "Part-time in the pediatric ward. No more emergency room stress." "That's great, Mom. I never doubted you. You know," she said softly. "Even when things were bad. You're just like your father, unstoppable when you set your mind to something." Marcus touched the technician's pin in his pocket. "I just wanted to make things better. You did more than that, baby. You built a future." After dinner, Marcus drove them home, but took a detour down Maple Avenue. He stopped at the spot where he'd first met Mr. Thompson. "This is where it happened?" his mother asked. "Yeah, right here." Marcus smiled. "I was so nervous, but I knew I could fix his car. Just didn't know I was fixing our lives too." They sat there for a moment, looking at the spot where everything had changed. Then Marcus put the car in gear and headed home. Monday would bring new challenges, another restoration, more cars, more opportunities to learn and grow. But now he was ready. More than ready. The Mercedes pin gleamed in his pocket, a reminder of where he'd started and how far he'd come. From a kid fixing junkyard cars to a restoration specialist trusted with million-dollar classics. From struggling to help his sick mother to providing her with the care she needed. All because he'd stopped one day to help someone in need, proving his worth through his work, just as Mr. Thompson had said. The future stretched out before him like an open road, full of possibility. Marcus Johnson, restoration specialist at Thompson Luxury Automobiles, was ready to drive into it at full speed. Sometimes the biggest journeys start with the smallest choices. For Marcus, it had started with a broken-down Mercedes and a chance to prove himself. Everything else, the challenges, the growth, the success, had flowed from that one moment of courage. As they turned onto their street, Marcus smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cars, new opportunities to prove himself. And he was ready for all of it.